Hello there and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are Ian Birrell, the contributing editor at the Daily Mail, and Tim Montgomerie, the comment editor at the Times. Pretty much all the front pages are in now. Let's have a look at them. And we're going to start with the Telegraph. It's leading on a warning from senior Liberal Democrats that voting for UKIP at the next election would derail Britain's economic recovery. And its main picture there is of Karen Brady, who has been made a CBE in the New Year's honours list. Onto the Financial Times, it says the heads of Britain's electricity firms are to be grilled by MPs about the amount of time it took to restore power to those affected by last week's severe storms. The Mirror has a picture of the scene in the French Alps where Michael Schumacher crashed into rocks while skiing. Onto The Guardian, it has an interview with the former Foreign Office Minister Alistair Burt, who says Britain has landed itself in a constitutional mess after voting against military action in Syria. And it pictures there Penelope Keith, who's been honoured for services to the arts and charity. Diet to beat Alzheimer's is the headline on the front of the Express. It says eating low cholesterol foods could help beat the disease. The Daily Mail says the number of town centres with problem pubs and bars has rocketed after the introduction of 24-hour drinking laws. The Times leads on a damehood for Alison Carnwath, the woman who tried to veto a multi-million-pound bonus for the former head of Barclays. And finally, The Sun says it's spoken to Romanians apparently planning to come to the UK to beg and steal after border rules are relaxed. Ian, we're going to start with the Times. Top honour for critic of city bonus payments. This might suggest a bit of a shift in the kinds of people who are getting these kinds of awards at the end of the year.
I think in a way it shows that there's still, I mean, she was also chairwoman of Land Securities, so she is sort of one of the typical sorts of people who are getting. Almost the more interesting element is the fact that Paul Tucker, who left the bank after being involved for so long through all the banking failures, and was involved in and criticised over his role in the Libel scandal, he also has been knighted, which I think shows that still too many people who are serving time in establishment roles, the political sycophants, the civil servants, etc., are still getting the knighthoods, even though there are more, and it's good to see that more ordinary people and charity workers and such like, I think 74% are now going to people like that. There's still too many of these sorts of people getting. You have to question whether Paul Tucker really deserves a knighthood, even though he spent a long time doing a job at the top of the bank.
He was in line for perhaps the governor of the Bank of England. He didn't get it, and you do actually wonder, Clive, whether this is a consolation prize given the knights. Yeah.
But this is your paper, Tim. Top honour for critic of city bonus payments. That is a fact, but that's not perhaps a sign that, you know, the honours are being given to people who are slightly out of the mainstream, who are bucking the establishment. Because, in fact, as Ian was saying, this woman is part of the establishment, very much so.
As Ian also said, 75% of people who get honours tomorrow, they're not on the front pages of the newspapers, they're not Penelope Keith's, people we recognise, but actually they're the people who do the charity work. So most honours do go to the people who don't get financial rewards for the community or other work they do. But yes, I take your point that this was someone who was very well paid as head of Land Securities, but while she was running Barclays Remuneration Board, she did say that the pay levels in the banks had reached obscene levels, and she was ostracised for that. But now, being welcomed with this award, she's being welcomed by society, the nation, and recognised. And I think most viewers of this programme would agree that the pay levels in the city did reach extreme levels, and here's someone who stood up against that. So I think this is a good honour.
Indeed. I mean, going on to the Daily Telegraph, Karen Brady is on the front page there. She received a CBE, and a sign there, Ian, that 51%, the majority of people getting awards, have been women this year. And that's the first time that's happened.
That's right, and that's great to see that finally the awards are reflecting the population at large, and that the same number of women are getting awards as there are women in the country. Interesting also to see the focus on Karen Brady, because I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of her in 2014. Famous, of course, for her football career and then The Apprentice, but also the Conservative Party seems to have fallen for her big time and is pushing her and promoting her very hard. There's talk of her being an MP, possibly even being the candidate for the Mayor of London. And in the past, there have been cases where people picked up like this have actually not been the wisest people to do. And it's interesting to see that she's the latest person who's a celebrity who's bedazzled politics, and to see what's going to come of that.
And that's the case, is it? I mean, from your understanding, you know, that you know, she is being pushed and promoted and trying to sort of tap into that section of population, more than half, that seems a little bit left a little bit cold by David Cameron and some of the policies from the Conservatives.
Well, the speculation is that Boris Johnson won't seek another term as London's mayor, possibly come back to Parliament. I think a lot of Tories would like Seb Coe, very popular figure behind London 2012's success. I don't think he wants to do it. He's too involved in the...
Do you fancy it, Tim? Maybe you...
No. Only if you were my running mate here. But,
it's a deal.
That would be a great partnership. I look forward to that.
But so a party that's looking for someone with a little bit of showbiz, a little bit of sparkle, and the Tories, I think, have been looking at Karen Brady and wondering whether she would be a good candidate for them. And then, of course, you have newspapers like The Independent on the front page today saying, has she just got this honour today because the Tories are wanting to favour her and bribe her some way to get her...
Do you like Syria as a candidate for mayor?
Well, I think she's someone who's given a lot of her time to football, to small businesses, so I think... She's an entrepreneurial role model for a lot of women in business, so I think she probably deserves the honour. And I'm not surprised that newspapers will spin this story as well.
Yeah.
I don't know whether she'd be a good candidate for London Mayor, and I don't even know whether she wants it. But
well, she could well be up against Eddie Izzard.
Interesting.
That seems to be the suggestion, so that would be an interesting
race. And Tessa Jowell, of course, another candidate.
Yeah,
it'd be great to have an all-women race for London.
No, that would be very interesting, wouldn't it? OK, let's go on to The Guardian. Tim, ex-minister reveals anger over Syria vote, decision to defy Prime Minister on military action created constitutional mess. This is Alistair Burt. He can speak now because he's out of a job.
Yes, and I think this is a wake-up call to a lot of us, actually, because I think when the deal was done that Vladimir Putin was involved in to inspect Syria's chemical weapons and decommission them, a lot of us welcomed the fact that the chemical weapons were being decommissioned, but of course, and then we averted our gaze from Syria. But while our gaze has been averted, Assad, with Russian helicopters and Russian munitions, has been increasing his bombardment of civilian populations of Syria. There is a terrible humanitarian tragedy taking place in that country now, and part of the reason, I think, people like Alistair Burt and others might argue, is that we didn't take the kind of intervention that we should have done. And so this Christmas in Syria, the Assad regime is dropping barrel bombs on places like Aleppo, barrels full of nails, full of the most horrible kind of munitions. And I think the front page of The Guardian and Alistair Burt's interview reminds us that while we are relatively comfortable in the Western world, not so far away, a terrible, terrible tragedy, humanitarian tragedy, is still unfolding.
And Ian, is this basically a dig at Ed Miliband and the Labour Party?
No, I don't think it is, actually. I think this was probably the single most important political event that happened this year, which has changed the way that prime ministers are empowered to go to war, which has huge repercussions going to the future. It changed Britain's status in the world. It altered the course of events in Syria. Ultimately, it has ended up strengthening. I mean, I think they were right not to mount an attack, because I think it would have backfired. But ultimately, it strengthened the hands of the jihadists, it strengthened the hand of Assad, it strengthened the hand of Iran, what's happened. And it's interesting also, further down the story, to see Malcolm Rifkind giving what I think is a rather Panglossian view of it, saying that it's been a happy chapter of events which has actually had a happy outcome and has strengthened diplomacy. I think that's completely wrong. I think it's...
Is he referring to the fact that the chemical weapons...
Exactly, that there was then a debate and chemical weapons have been withdrawn from the arena. But the reality is Assad is winning the battle, that the jihadists are strengthened there. And, you know, as Tim says, Syria is in a very sorry state. I had an email today from someone who's just left Aleppo yesterday, and he was saying he's walking around, the city's destroyed, people all have mental health problems who are there because they're so shattered by what they've seen. There's corpses on the streets, there's barrel bombs dropping. You know, it's an absolute wreck. Well, and the idea that this has had a happy outcome is just ludicrous.
And I think one of the points that Alistair Burt makes in this interview is that it also undermines the British Prime Minister and the British government in the world, because he says now, apart from perhaps action to defend the Falklands or Gibraltar, he cannot really see a British Parliament voting for the kind of humanitarian intervention or any kind of military intervention in the world with any confidence. And that means that a British Prime Minister goes into international fora, goes to the UN, talks to the American President, and think, well, can he actually deliver any British
I was at the G20 in the days after the vote, and it was very noticeable that Britain actually was sort of shunted to the sidelines. And in fact, Hollande's press spokesman even said to me straight off that Britain has been weakened by this, and that's a fact of life. It may be good that Parliament has more say, it may be bad, but it's a really, really significant political event that happened this year that I don't think people have quite taken on board what it means to prime ministerial authority, to the power of Parliament, to democracy, and to Britain's role in the world.
Very interesting. OK, on to the Independent. £1 billion profit, but not enough staff to keep the lights on. Blackout boss who admitted failing thousands of customers at Christmas earned £1.7 million. Tim, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the fact that the Commons is one of the select committees, the Energy Committee, is actually going to be grilling some of the bosses of the big energy firms over the perceived suggestion that they have not been quick enough in getting people's electricity and whatever power back on following the recent floods and the problems over the last few days. This puts it all into context as well for the public, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the public we saw that lady, didn't we, in Yalding in Kent, berating the Prime Minister. Yeah. What are you doing about the fact I haven't got heating and lights? And I think the politicians are now responding and saying, turning their gaze to the electricity companies and saying,
it's not us, it's not my fault.
It's not us, and showing that they're on the side of the people who've been affected by these floods and these outages. Now, this level of profit does seem huge to all of us. I still am not persuaded that any energy company, energy infrastructure can overcome the fact that we will have natural events, very bad weather of the kind we've seen over the last few days. Although you don't want to be without electricity for a minute, let alone a day or two, I think most of the electricity companies seem to act pretty quickly as far as I could see. But Parliament will make its inquiry and maybe they can learn some lessons that are useful.
Sorry, you were going to say?
I was just going to say the public will, I think, have a right to be concerned if a company is taking £1 billion in profits, paying its chief executive over £1 million and can't keep the lights going. The public has a right, I think, then to investigate and to inquiry that and to ask deep questions.
A right to investigate.
And if there is, if they have shown incompetence, and it may be that actually it's just an event that happened over Christmas and these things do happen, but if there is any incompetence or anything, I think there's grounds for quite serious questions to be asked.
Absolutely.
That's it, apparently. We've run out of time. We've got 4 papers. How did that happen? Oh, well, that is clearly what happens when we're having fun. Ian, Tim, it's been great having you in.
Thank you very much.
I'm looking at some of the stories behind the headlines, so many thanks to you.